Here's one of the #1 reasons that it's hard for you to get out of rumination that you may not know. Have you ever heard of a concept called emotional inertia? In summary, it's our brain's innate resistance to change. We don't like changing our habits. We don't like changing our routines. Because sometimes change can feel unsafe. Rumination is not just going to go away on its own. It is a conscious effort that you make to break that bad habit and replace it with a healthy one. The choices and the decisions that the narcissist made had absolutely nothing to do with you. Now, what do I mean by that? Narcissistic and toxic people, they have patterns of behavior, meaning they essentially do the exact same thing to every single person that comes in their life. They might just change up the details a little bit based on your relationship. My ex cheated on me the last 5 months of our relationship. I don't have proof of it, but I can almost guarantee you he cheated on his ex-husband. It's what he does. I know for a fact that I wasn't perfect in the relationship, but I was always physically available for him. I wasn't rejecting him. In fact, he was rejecting me. Him cheating on me had nothing to do with me. Him not being able to take responsibility of his own actions had nothing to do with me. They did it to the one before you. They did it to you. And guarantee they'll do it to the next one. Because it's who they are. Is your friend a narcissist? Do you constantly feel like you're a babysitter every time y'all hang out? Do you find yourself bending to do what they want to do just to avoid conflict? Does every conversation end up being back about them? Is every other former best friend of theirs a narcissist? Or toxic? Do they suddenly become very, very needy of your attention after you hang out with other friends? Do you need a mental break after you've hung out with them for a couple of days? They may not be a narcissist, but they're sure as hell toxic. So I've been seeing a lot of comments floating around on TikTok about how narcissism is only in 1% of the population. Here's a little FYI for your FYP. Narcissistic behavior is actually associated with a lot of other things. So since we all love Google, we'll just stick with that. Manic bipolar, 2.8% of the US population. Narcissism's associated with that. 20 to 48% of all youth have had childhood trauma, which could potentially develop narcissistic behavior. According to the American Addiction Center, in 2017, 38% of adults battled with illicit drug use. I am not shaming people with struggles because we all have them, but narcissistic behaviors is associated with addicts of all kinds. And we can't forget this one, but here's what's funny. According to Google, 6% of the US population has NPD. Now let's pretend they only abuse 5 people in their whole life. That creates almost 98 million survivors. I have an analogy for you. I want you to imagine that you go to an amusement park and you ride the biggest ride that's there. All the twists, all the turns, and all the big drops. And then, right after that, you instantly get on the kiddie ride. No big twists, no big turns, no big drops, but it's safe. It's reliable. It's secure. Would you feel a little bored? Probably. That is what a healthy relationship after a narcissistic relationship can feel like. Think about it. It's literally exhausting to have to continue to clarify this. Saying to someone, if they're toxic, just leave. If it's that bad, just get out. If you hang around with someone that terrible, it's your fault. None of that bullshit is practical advice. It's actually completely condescending. Because probably the last time that we wanted to leave, we were threatened. Or we were told we'd never make it on our own. If you want to give practical advice or say something that's practical, what you should be saying is, how can I help you leave? Because I can see that you're scared and I can see that you're miserable. What support can I give you? If you're not going to say anything with that kind of tender-hearted attitude, then please just do us all a favor and sit the fuck down. Have you ever heard of narcissistic countering? And did you know this is a very common tactic in order to manipulate and control you? This is when a narcissist continually opposes your own individual thoughts or opinions, because God forbid that you have those. The reason this is used to control or manipulate you is because this tactic wears you out mentally. Because if you're constantly being fought every single day about every thought and opinion that you have, eventually you're just going to stop sharing them, and therefore minimize your own voice. And they'll do this whether they actually agree with you or not, because that's not what it's about. It's about asserting their power and their control over you, little by little. Let me know if you need some examples. You've probably heard the term rumination before, but I want to take some time to really explain what it is. This is one of the key factors that makes leaving a narcissistic and toxic person different than any other breakup.
It's a cycle of obsessive thinking. They're the first person that you think about when you wake up, the last person you think about when you go to bed, and probably often on all day in between. If you have contact with them or find something of theirs, it could spin you into a negative thought pattern that could last hours, if not days. You could have an uncontrollable urge to cyberstalk them, or maybe the new supply, and you're constantly trying to make sense of everything that happened to you. Breaking rumination takes as much discipline and work as it does to break an addiction, because essentially that's what you were in, a love addiction to the narcissist. And just because the relationship ended doesn't mean that the addiction stopped. This was by far the hardest habit for me to break. It took setting up healthy distractions, changing my viewpoint about myself, and moving into acceptance of who this person really is. It takes time and discipline for this to go away.
So I have actually said this exact same thing to myself at one point in time, and here's what helped me. If you've genuinely had the concern if you were actually the narcissist, the likelihood is you aren't one. What you're doing right now is called self-reflection. You're also being open to the possibility that maybe there's things that you can improve on, or that maybe in fact there is something wrong with you. If you're asking yourself this or thinking this at all, you're not a narcissist. Because everything I just said, narcissists can't do. A narcissist is always the victim. They're never wrong. They're not the problem. Everyone else is. They are God's gift to mankind and an expert on everything. So, sweetheart, you're not a narcissist. What you're trying to do is just try to come up with a logical explanation of what happened to you. And unfortunately, there isn't one. It's very difficult to explain illogical behavior of a narcissist through our normal logical thinking. Sometimes you have to work your way up to no contact, and that's okay. I had to. It took me 4 months to go completely no contact. So I did it in stages. At first it was, I'll just go an hour without responding. And then it was, you know what, I'm not going to call him back. I'll just text him back. Then it was blocking him on all social media, but I still had his phone number unblocked. And then I finally blocked. For me personally, I had to build my self-worth enough to have the strength to go no contact. I had to get to the point where I valued myself more than what his opinion of me was. And once that happened, I was done. Let me clarify why a healthy relationship might feel boring for you after a narcissistic or toxic one. I am not saying that there is no excitement in healthy relationships. What I'm saying is one of the things that we were addicted to in these toxic relationships was the extremes. The extreme highs and the extreme lows. Especially with the love bombing and the extreme highs, there's a level of excitement there. Every single relationship has a pattern of highs and lows. But a narcissistic and toxic relationship goes like this. We're already looking for anything and everything to be wrong with someone we're going on a date with. So because of that, sometimes what happens is someone that's moving at just a normal and respectful pace, our trauma brain comes in and says, well, I'm bored. Because your ex is probably planning your honeymoon after the second date. This isn't guaranteed to happen, but it's possible. Because we're redefining what normal is. I have a perfect metaphor for you for reactive abuse. Reactive abuse is you slipping on the eggshells that they require you to walk on. And while you're laying on the floor covered in those eggshells, they have the audacity to look at you and say, why are you such a klutz? You should work on that. So I want to talk about the difference between a toxic person dog whistling and gaslighting you. I believe they have a cohesive relationship, but they're not the same thing. There's different forms of dog whistling, but when it comes to toxic people, this is when they bring up a topic of conversation that they know triggers you, but to everyone else around you, it sounds like normal conversation. Gaslighting is when someone has an abusive behavior towards you, and they either deny the behavior or they blame you for their own behavior. This is why I believe dog whistling leads to gaslighting. Sometimes it happens, we react to the dog whistling. And when we have this reaction and we try to call them out on their behavior, they gaslight us. So in my opinion, dog whistling is the actual abusive behavior, and then they gaslight you to make you feel crazy like you're the problem. So again, they work together, but they're not necessarily the same thing. Girl, I'm so glad someone said this, because the exact same thing happened to me. My ex and I shared our location with each other. We had our passcodes to each other's phones. We had open access to each other's phone. And he was still doing his side hustle in the last 5 months of our relationship. These people, they are going to make these choices and they will figure out a way. Is sharing your location and all this stuff going to make it a little harder for them? Yep. But if they're going to do it, they're going to do it. What I had to realize is that his choices to do all of this behind my back had no reflection on my worth and my value. It had everything to do with him. And that's why after our relationship, he ended up back in the hole that I found him in, probably alone, and has active warrants for his arrest. Meanwhile, I'm engaged, and I started grad school to get my doctorate degree. Choices. Alright, so I'm going to be honest with y'all. Breaking cognitive dissonance is probably the least favorite thing that I'm ever going to teach you. Because it sucks. And it sucks because you have to relive some pretty painful things. Quick recap on what cognitive dissonance is. It's essentially when your reality got hijacked. It's a result of the gaslighting, the blame shifting, the projection, like all that crap. When we are saying things like, I know there was some good in there, what we are doing is we are avoiding the pain of accepting the fact that this person was essentially a monster. Because good people don't do what this person did. And that's a really hard thing to accept. Nobody wants to admit that they were played. Nobody wants to admit that there was a monster in their bed. It's very cliche, but acceptance really is the first step. And we have to stop giving them any sort of benefit of the doubt. So how do you accept it? Write it down. Write down everything that they ever did to you. And remind yourself who this person really is.